We want to take up any more of your time. We want to hear from you. Please, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. On step six, I might give away a lot of time, but I won't. Uh, I am an alcoholic. My name is Gary Kincaid, and I am really, really, really grateful for our sobriety date and a new life that started July 25th, 1994. I live in Sulphur Springs, Texas, a little town outside of Dallas, about 100 miles. Uh, we're in the part of the steps for me, of course, uh, where it's real difficult to just pull one of them out and to have it have meaning apart from all the rest of the process. But I'll do the best I can with that. And I'll share with you as we get started. My experience with six and with seven is very sloppy. There's been nothing fluid about it from the very beginning. I love the description that I heard in my sponsor's living room as we listened to Joe and Charlie in my first weeks of in 1994, and they give at least in the set that I was listening to, of saying that the steps in the big book all have some directions with them. We've got a fourth of the book on the first step. We've got a whole chapter dedicated to the second step. We've got pretty good directions for step three, very specific directions for step 4 and 5. 8 and 9, we've got several pages. We get into 10 and 11 and 12, and they said it's like going to the hardware store. And there are some tools in the hardware store. If you get that tool, it comes with almost a book of directions that you have to read and understand in order to use the tool correctly. And what Joe and Charlie said about 6 and 7 said these are like a crowbar. You don't need a set of instructions for a crowbar. You just grab the thing and you start digging, and you'll keep digging for the rest of your life. And you'll figure out as you go how to hold the crowbar, when to put more emphasis on it, how to lean into it. But it's a tool that you have to use in order to gain anything from it. So that's been my experience with it. And given a little background, part of my experience in recovery is I'm a licensed psych therapist. At one time, I was a clinical director of a private psych hospital, and a couple of times I've been the director of psych hospitals that also had treatment wings. And I get to see a lot of the information that comes from the really multi-billion-dollar industry of recovery support that's out there. I mean, many of us went through a lot of self-help books before we ever got to AA. If you were like me, with a great deal of failure accompanied that. And the industry for doing treatment also has a lot of self-help and explanatory books about the meaning behind steps and so forth and so on. I've just never been a fan of those. If you've been on this few weeks with me, one of the things that's vital to my experience in recovery, and I'm thankful for sponsorship and the big book got this just firmly implanted in my being early on, that alcoholism is fundamentally a spiritual illness. Now, certainly it has We know it as a threefold illness, physical and mental and spiritual, but it's primarily spiritual. And having come from the background that I came from, I believe I almost intuitively recognized it once. Even before I knew what was really wrong with me, I knew it was not going to respond to therapy. It was going to need a spiritual answer. And that's what I've experienced in here. So I'm not putting down any other group or any person, and there may be people in this meeting that love a lot of the accompanying literature that comes to us about the steps. I'm just going to tell you that's not been part of my experience. Do y'all remember? I can tell looking here, I can just look at the bright faces. I know that Jeff probably did this. I know Cindy and her friends did this. Probably Daniel and certainly Max. Y'all remember back in the day before recovery, sitting around with your friends and family discussing your defects of character? I never had a discussion about that with anybody. Now, I was around friends and family who were, I guess you could say, in some ways discussing what they believed were some of my defects of character, but they didn't call them that. So this was a whole new idea for me. And I remember reading through the big book, and I get here to the top of page 76, and it's kind of like a sign of just a breath of relief. I mean, there's been a lot of work up to this point, and 6 and 7 are just 2 paragraphs. We can kind of skip on by those pretty quickly and get on with the real business. And what I found out later on, that's been one of the major emphasis of my recovery since I've been here. Bill says that we're going to be dealing with these things for a lifetime. So let me give you my experience. I was really tempted this week, folks, to get out my 12 and 12 and go to the language of the heart, look up some other information and try to get really, really educated on what the literature says about this. And I've read all that stuff, and I've read it individually, and I've read it with the men and women that I've sponsored, and I know all of that information. But what I've discovered in here is knowing something is secondary to action. That action is the key word here, not more self-knowledge, not more information about whatever the defect may be and where it came from and why I have it and what it means. And I'm sure that can be very interesting to a lot of people, but I'm telling you, it's not the least bit interesting to me. So I'm going to try to share with you what I said in the beginning, that this is going to be a kind of a sloppy look at this, because it's not been a easy, fluid, aha kind of thing. It's been a continual surrender to what's outlined in this program. And here are the things that have had meaning to me. Read the steps themselves, just like it asked me to do after doing my 5th step. And my sponsor told me, go home. And I had one of those sponsors that said, if your book's on the nightstand, put it on the shelf, because I want you to follow directions exactly. It says, returning home, we find a place where we be quiet for an hour, carefully reviewing what we've done. We thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know Him better. And I remember reading that the first time around and being puzzled and thinking, I'm not sure that's true right now. I'm not sure I know God better. But I went ahead and followed the directions that were there. And I can tell you I did that because I had a phone call from my sponsor waiting on me when I got home to remind me to do as he was instructing me to do. taking this book down from our shelf, we turned to the page which contains the 12 steps. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we ask if we have omitted anything. That may be the first time that I carefully read those first 5 proposals, the first 5 steps. And when you get to step 5, it describes what I believed I had just done with Jerry. I'd admitted to God, I'd admitted to myself, and I'd admitted to another human being the exact nature of my wrong. And in that hour alone, I gained more understanding of what Jerry and I had just done than while I was doing it with him. And if you go to the 6th step, it says, see, this follows what we just read, the nature of our wrongs. Being entirely ready to help God remove all these defects of character. Well, which ones? The ones that were just revealed to me in doing my resentment and my fears and my sex inventory with my sponsor. And I didn't get this, if you're new here, quickly. I got the first look at it. This has been presented to me over and over again over the years. But this is what I was shown, this is the way I was taught, and this is the way I've lived it out from that day to this. That paragraph after the resentment inventory of we resolutely look at our mistakes. Where had we been selfish, self-centered, frightened, and dishonest? And for me, those were my defects of character. And then I went back to the fear inventory. What's the main thing that's being looked at in the fear inventory, at least for me, was I got a searchlight all over my life where self-reliance had failed me. And where there had never been a time in my life that I had in any shape, form, or fashion had any kind of dependence upon God. And I could see that after my 5th step. And when I got over into the sex inventory, I could see some manifestations of that. Jealousy, bitterness, self-centeredness. And with his help, when we reviewed it later, I could see where most of that came out of, again, frightened and dishonest. And so it began to hit me. I didn't have it down the way I understand it today, but my defects of character were illuminated in that 5th step. And so I'm not one who has ever gone, Bill talks in the 12 and 12 about the 7 deadly sins, and he talks about different lists. I've never used any of those lists. For me, dishonest and frightened, selfish and self-centered, I could take almost any list that's being given and I could find them plugged in under one of those 4. And then you add extreme self-reliance to that, and you've pretty much got the outline of what I understand to be my defects of character. The thing that hit me when I'm reviewing that before going on to the next page, and this was the main thing that stuck out to me in that first time through the image. The alcoholic, more than most, leads a double life. Then by the time I got through with that inventory and when I'm at home doing what it's asking me to do here, this review, I could see that. I could see it as clear that day as I can see it today. Now, over the years, and this has all come from working with other men and women and taking them through the program, I could see more manifestations of what happened when I lead a double life. In leading a double life, I've got to be dishonest. Because I don't know about y'all, but I knew when I was lying to people. I knew when I was hiding things. I didn't know the lies I was telling myself, but I knew when I was living dishonestly. But look at the third step again later when I'm going through that now with a newcomer in. And I got more understanding of step 3 the first time I took someone else through step 3 than I did all the times of talking with my sponsor about it. And I came across that line in there, were we not producers of confusion rather than harmony? And for me, that added to the leading the double life. And the idea was nobody ever knew what they were getting when they were getting me. Later on, that backs up to the doctor's opinion. You see, I told y'all this was going to be sloppy tonight. You got to pay attention to get this tonight. That line in there, it did not satisfy us to be told that we were outright mental defectives, maladjusted to life, and full flight from reality. I could begin to see that more when I'm taking someone else through the book. And it came to me that maladjusted to life was one of the most important revelations that I've received in my recovery. By the time I am through this first 5th step, I'm talking on that night when I don't know anything about what I've done. I had an instant understanding that the alcohol did not cause any of my problems beyond the physical in some of those, but it was these defects of character. It was the dishonesty. It was the fear. It was the self-reliance. It took me a while. Y'all can do this for yourself. One of the things my sponsor told me to do at this time was, he said, you've been using these words selfish and self-centered, and I'm pretty sure you weren't using them as much before you came to AA as you are using them now, because, man, y'all throw those words around all over the place all the time. And he suggested to me that I better come up with my understanding is what is it I'm saying when I say I'm self-centered and I'm selfish, and not just believe that there's some kind of generic definition of that everybody gets. Because what these terms have become for me are a huge part of these defects that I'm looking at. They are the nature of my character. And these are two of the very things that stand between me and all of those fears that I had, that self-reliance had failed me on. Will I ever have a relationship with my children again? Will I ever have any peace with my family? Will I ever have, any way to not live life afraid? Will I ever be able to be okay again? Those are all fears that I had, and many others that I listed. And I can now see I had them because of this self-reliance thing, and I'm still getting used to that. But I could see if something didn't get done with that, I was always going to be living those fears. That just not drinking wasn't going to take any of them away. It was going to require more action. Because you see, I'm a guy that has several master's degrees. I've got psychology and literature and theology. I've read everything in the world. I could sit down and have a philosophical discussion about down there anything with anybody. But it didn't do me any good. And it was not going to be of any benefit to me to be changed. And I use that phrase to tell you that that's what I've always attempted to do since that first week. Now that I know this, I'm going to be different. I'm going to change me. And I keep missing, at least for me, if I could have changed me before I got to y'all, I would have. I am powerless to do that. I don't change me, I get changed. At least that's been my experience. The way I've shared it with folks is that I'm not one of those people that believes I can use the steps to work on specific areas of my life. Like I'm going to use the steps to work on my relationship with my daughter or my dad, or I'm going to use the steps to work on my sex conduct, which was, if there's any version of a male slut, that's what I am when I get to y'all. Sex and partying and drinking had always been a driving force in my life. And all I knew to do with that thing is what I'd tried to do with it before getting here. I'm not going to do that anymore. And y'all know how successful that self-reliance is on any of these defects. It was totally a failure in my life. So I started coming to understand here in doing 6 and 7 that when I drank alcohol, I didn't tell it where I wanted to go. I went where it took me. And if I'm going to surrender to the spiritual program of recovery as it's outlined in this book, I don't get to tell it where I want to go and what I want to work on. I surrender to it and I become willing to go wherever it takes me. And that's a little bit of my understanding of, that 7th step, which we'll get into next week, and that'll be more about prayer than anything else. But that part of, you always hear it in the meetings sometimes. Maybe God is just not ready to take that away from me yet. I've never got into that kind of language. I believe God is always ready. There seems to be a little reluctance on the part of Gary to become entirely ready. And that's a continual thing. But when I saw that maladjusted to life, when I'm doing this review, that's when it hit me. I was maladjusted to life before I ever started drinking. I had these defects of dishonesty and living out of fear and selfishness and self-centeredness and reliance upon me and no one or nobody or certainly no higher power. I had that going on before I ever took my first drop of alcohol. So it began to hit me. Alcohol is not what made me lie and cheat and steal. That line that we read right before the 3rd step, our pertinent adventures before and after. Now, I believe we mentioned this earlier. Everybody in this meeting tonight that's in recovery can probably discover times since your dry date that you have behaved in almost exactly the same manner that you have before recovery when it comes to being dishonest or selfish or self-centered. I nearly everything that I was totally ashamed of around relationships and stuff like that. I've done all that sober, and I can't blame it on the alcohol. It's the defects of character that were already in me that I live by. A set of, I heard a guy say early on, everybody has a set of principles that you're living by before you come to AA. We've all had principles. We've all always lived by principles. We know about that because that's what I use to judge other people with and to judge the success of my life with. And, you know, those principles led me into many of those resentments because I could justify and rationalize those things. We all have principles. Everybody lives by principles. What I'm doing in recovery is I'm gaining a new set of principles to take the place of the ones I had before I came to you people. And what makes me willing to do that? Same thing that made you willing to do it. Pain in the beginning. But I also heard about this time with reference to this step 6. You and I are people. Well, I'm a person. I'll just let y'all join in. But it takes me about 3 minutes to develop a lifelong bad habit. And it takes me about a year to start developing a good habit. I can do the bad habit almost instantly because it's got that self-gratification, instant gratification attached to it. And AA doesn't have that instant gratification, particularly in the beginning. It didn't have it for me. So here's some things that happen, and this is the actions that have come my way of dealing with this 6th step. Very shortly after taking the inventory, I was at a meeting in Midland, Texas. I believe I mentioned this earlier, but the guy got up and spoke as a podium meeting. I get to know this guy later on. He becomes a good friend, but at that time he had like 30 years recovery, and I couldn't talk to those people at the beginning. But Gene got up and said, in the end, folks, AA just means being where you say you're going to be, doing what you said you'd do when you said you would do it. And when he said that, I heard that and I realized that that's one of those areas where Gary has always been a producer of confusion rather than harmony. Because nobody could ever depend on me to be where I said I was going to be, doing what I said I was going to do when I said I was going to do it. Because if a better deal came up, and it didn't matter if I was married to you or gave birth to you or was employed by you, I always would do whatever I wanted to do, and I would manipulate the situation so I could do that. I was not dependable at all. Now, hearing that didn't make me dependable, but it gave me my first actions to start taking. And I began to understand these out of some things that Jerry had told me. And now they became my desire to do those things. Things like get to the meeting 20 minutes early. When you go to the meeting, be prepared to stay at least 20 minutes afterwards. If you're going to someone's house and they've invited you to be there at 6 o'clock, don't come at 6:30. Don't show up at 5 o'clock. Show up at the time you've been invited. Now, those may sound like minor things, but it was just stuff around being where I said I would be that I really had to work at that. And it meant that I had to get into my morning meditation and look at my day and not just live that, that whatever the moment says, I'll go do it. And I recognized that that was part of this feedback. I hope I've got time to do this, but I'll tell this story. In our meeting, somebody signed up every month to bring cookies to the 5:30 meeting. So in about I've already taken this, I'm well into my 9th step. It's about my 3rd month. Jerry, my sponsor, is signed up to bring the cookies. And he tells me, he takes me to Walmart and he shows me the 2 brands of cookies. I'm to get 2 packages of these and 2 packages of these. He bought them that first day. And then he gave me the money each day to go buy the cookies. Well, I remember I'm supposed to get the cookies. I'm going to the meeting. I get to Walmart that first day, and my God, I'm in a hurry. I mean, I'm on a schedule. It's going to be hard for me to make it. And I get in there, and, you know, it's that old story in AA. There's some woman in line that's got 15 articles in the 9-article line. I'm in a hurry, and I'm getting there, and, you know, I finally can pay for it. I get out and get to my car, and I drive like hell to try to get to the meeting. I get there about 3 minutes before the meeting starts. God, I'm a wreck. Next day, same dang thing. Next day, same thing. And we get towards the end of the month, and Jerry said, well, have you learned what I was trying to teach you with this? And I'm like, I don't have a clue. He said, guess what? I'm going to volunteer for the next month. We'll keep doing this till you figure out what it is you're supposed to learn. And I've gone about 45 days, and getting these damn cookies is about to, it's putting my sobriety at risk. I mean, I'm just a wreck because the traffic is tight and people won't turn left when the light comes on. I'm a horn honker, you know. And finally, Jerry said, I can't stand it any longer. I know you can. What's the lesson, Gary? And I'm like, I don't know. He said, Walmart is always going to be Walmart. The lesson I've been trying to get you to learn is go 15 minutes earlier than you've been going. Now, how simple is that? But I couldn't get it without every day just being a mess and him finally having to explain it to me. And for me, that fit in with some of this 6th step of my self-centeredness. I think I'm the guy that when he goes to Walmart, the aisles are clear. There should be a cashier there. Everything ought to go smoothly. When I get in my car, all the people are supposed to drive correctly. And so by learning how to pay attention to being where I said I'd be, doing what I said I would do when I said I would do it, I learned that all of those external things that can change that schedule are not the fault of other people. They're the fault of me, not, I guess you would say, planning my life and just getting there 15 minutes early, because Walmart will always be Walmart. And if I'm 10 or 12 or 15 years sober and I'm still getting pissed, when I go to the grocery store, I'm stuck in traffic. There's something the matter with me. And I've got to say that I've been like that since I was a kid. And those kind of things had to change. Now, the next thing that really helped, and I had this pounded into me. I don't know if pounded would be the way, but over and over again. People, I'm telling you, for me, that paragraph on page 14 of the book, the alcoholic that fails to perfect and enlarge their spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others cannot meet certain trials in most lives. That's why it is. I don't want to share with you the understandings that have come into my life as much as I want to share with you the actions that I've been directed to take that bring about those understandings. And for me, that being very intentional about meeting that newcomer, about I've had a new sponsee all the time since I was about 16 or 17 months old. And it hadn't always been convenient, but it has always brought deeper meaning and understanding, and it's been a way of me being changed in this program by helping take someone else through. Now, I'll share the first guy with you later on, but the first one I had that took all of the steps was Scott. I was almost 3.5 years sober when I got Scott. And I am white knuckling being a good person as hard as I can. But man, it doesn't come natural. And especially it didn't come natural for me around sex and relationship. I'm trying to be different. I'm trying not to be the guy I was. And I tell you what, I don't know any other way to say this but this. And if you get offended, talk to your sponsor. But I damn near screwed my way out of AA at that second and third year. We only had about a dozen meetings at Midland and Odessa. And I'm not wanting to be, but I turned out to be this guy that's getting in those instant relationships. And of course, they never last. And then it's like, I can't go back to that meeting. I can't go back to that meeting. I can't go back to that meeting. And I got Scott. And Scott was angry, scared, but he did the work. And that wasn't even an issue for Scott, the sexual stuff. But when we were going through his fourth step preparation and going through his fifth step, I finally saw that line in the sex inventory that I hadn't done when I did the steps with Jerry. That part about we asked God to help us set the ideal for our future sex life. I don't know how I'd missed that, but I'd given that up to that time only token response. And so in working with Scott, when he's writing his inventory, and I'm doing it this time exactly like Jerry did with me, I get them over to my house, give them the notebook and the pen and tell them I'll be back in a few hours and we'll do your fifth step. Only when I was working with Scott, I didn't leave. I went to the next room and I read through that sex inventory again. And I sat down and I wrote out what, with God's help, I would like my ideal future sex life to look like. Now, I don't believe I would ever have done that had I not been taking someone else through the steps. And I'll tell you, from that day to this, with God's help, I only deviated from that twice. And both of those times blew my life up like somebody had stuck a ton of dynamite under it. I got away from that ideal. I got away from transparency. I didn't tell my sponsor. I didn't share what I was going to do. And in my 7th year and in my 13th year, I got involved almost that quickly, going back to old sexual behavior, and it like to kill me both times. And it had nothing to do with me surrendering to that ideal sex life. I was right back to the old defect to where a woman was a drink on 2 legs. How's she going to make me feel? Right back to self-centeredness and dishonesty. And when that happened, and this is why I've been sharing the whole 40 minutes on. Step 6 and step 7 demand of me total transparency and accountability. And when I went into both of those, I'll use the word relationships that like to blow me up, there was no transparency and there was no accountability. It was all about the excitement of the moment. And I was right back in the middle of secrets again. Because in neither case, I couldn't let anybody find out. People I sponsor can't know. My sponsor can't know. You know, their husband can't know. It's got to be a secret. And I'm the guy that's been sharing in meetings all this time secrets. You're only as sick as your secrets. Your secrets will kill you, not the behavior. And I found within about 2 days, I had to call Steve, my sponsor. He laughed about 10 minutes. And then he gave me these actions. He said, you go to the noon meeting today, you find a newcomer, and you take him out for coffee after lunch. I don't care if you got a corner 10 of them to find one of them, they'll go with you. And after you've met and talked with him, call me. And when I called him, by the time I called him and got together, I knew exactly what I was going to have to do. I was going to have to end that. I was going to have to make amends for that, the ones that I could. And I was going to have to utter around, and maybe this won't work for some of y'all, but that's where I learned the meaning of one of the greatest and only thing that I can do in some of my worst times, my worst behavior. The best I can do is not beat myself up, not be guilty and ashamed. The best I can do is just say, oops. Clean up the mess, hopefully learn from it, and then get back to, with God's help, living by the ideals that I found in these steps. So it comes from working with others. It comes from not having secrets. If anybody is serious about step 6 and 7, and we'll get to this later, they're going to be doing a step 10 constantly. But I found that I cannot live with secrets. Because when I've got a secret, keeping that secret is more important than being at one with you. And in that moment, I lose all intimacy with all other people. And I can find myself like I did at 13 years sober, one more time, all alone. Because that's what secrets do. So this may shock or surprise some of you. I tell my guys and gals that I sponsor, we don't care what you do in AA. You want to sleep with other people's spouses? We're not going to judge that. Just make sure their spouse knows about it. Make sure your spouse knows about it. You want to do internet sex and internet gambling? We don't care. Just put the computer or put that phone on the kitchen table where your spouse and your kids are. Because it's not what you're doing that's going to kill you, it's what you're hiding. And if you think you have to hide it, then bud, you better not be doing it. And the last thing I'll share is about accountability. And I've always had a group of men, and I know a lot of ladies in recovery, they've always had a group of ladies they're with, that they're totally transparent and accountable. When I was 2 years sober, my sponsor got a new computer. This is 1995. I'd never had a computer. He gave his old computer to my sponsor, and my sponsor gave his old computer to me. Now I know we're right here at the end. This will be the last story. I had to call Steve. This is back in the days of dial-up. I mean, this computer was slow by itself, and y'all remember dial-up. Some of those getting on some sites took you 15 minutes. And I called Steve up. I said, Steve, you've got to come over, man. I'm on every swinger and porn site there is on this computer. I can't be doing this. And I thought he had come over to the house and we'd do something very spiritual and that would be yanked out of me. He came over to the house. He said, who's your internet provider? And I told him, he said, call them up and have it disconnected. Now, I'm not sure if that's the kind of work I wanted. But I did what he asked me to do, and you know what? When I had it disconnected, I wasn't doing it anymore. Now, when I'm 7 years sober, I'm sponsoring a guy, and he's got some of those same problems. His wife had divorced him because she had found him on all these relationship and sex sites on the computer. It's almost like he was addicted to it. And so when we were looking at how he was going to work on these things, I said, I've got an idea. Let's go down. I'm going to buy a computer. And we had a group of 4 guys meeting to go through the steps. And we all agreed that we would give each other permission to check our history on the computer at any time. I got that new computer at 7 years sober, and Larry and those other guys loved checking my history since I was their sponsor. But you know, from that time to this, I never had to get back on one of those sites, not because I'm a good guy, but because this action of accountability with other men in the program helped to change me and my behaviors. And all of that came about from trying to be transparent and trying to honestly take other people through the steps of our book. And finally, having the understanding that I cannot ask anybody to do what I'm not doing. And so by me continuing to take the actions that I'm going to ask a new person to do, it's like that crowbar just keeps digging in to my life. And week by week, and month by month, and year by year, more and more of those defects get chipped out.
Gary, we need to wrap it up.
Okay. Well, that's a good place for me to end.
Great place to